to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the rumors that have started to circulate out of Minnesota about Stefon Diggs. And I'll try to have another video up today as well. I'll try to have one, if not two more, before I go to work. But yeah, we're going to start with Diggs. Obviously, this is a big story right now all over social media, all over the internet. That the Vikings are looking to move on from this guy. And to be honest with you, I'm not surprised. And I'll get into a lot of the reasons as to why. I'll talk about the pros and the cons to bringing in Stefon Diggs and whether or not I think it's a realistic possibility. I've read several websites where the Giants are listed as one of the top 5 destinations where Diggs could go. A lot of people seem to think the Patriots could very well be the front runners if they do, in fact, decide to trade him. What is the price going to be for this young talent, and why I think he may not be worth the price that some Minnesota Vikings fans may think that he will command? He certainly has a lot of pros going for him. We'll start with his ability. He's 6 foot tall, 191 pounds. He is a supreme route runner. I always remember that from watching him from his scouting report when he came into the league. Could play. He's versatile too, something that Joe Judge loves. He could play in both the slot and on the outside, and would bring instant credibility to this New York Giants receiving corps. Make no mistake about that, right? We all remember the catch against the New Orleans Saints in the playoffs, the miracle catch off the arm of Case Keenum, but is a very good, wide receiver. I wouldn't say great, but very, very good. Not necessarily the receiver that would fit Jason Garrett's system, but regardless, would instantly be our number 1 wide receiver. And let's just say, hypothetically, that the New York Giants were able to orchestrate a trade with the Vikings. I would try, if I was going to do this, to include, obviously they're going to want picks, but I would try to include Golden Tate, or even possibly Sterling Shepard to try to offset some of the salary. That way you're not bringing on too much salary and you're getting your number 1 wide receiver. And I would throw in, obviously the draft picks that were necessary to make the trade. That would be my mindset if I was Dave Gettleman. Now, do I think Dave Gettleman is going to bring this guy on, and do I think he should? Well, that's the question, that needs to be answered. Obviously, I went over a lot of the pros, and I'll get into some of his statistics and his contract. His contract is another pro. He's actually under a very cost-effective contract when you factor in his age and you factor in the current market for the wide receiver position. The Vikings extended him before the market skyrocketed. So those are some of the pros to Stefon Diggs, and that is why I think Vikings fans think that they could command a number 1 first-round pick, rather. Now, they're not getting the Giants 4th overall, but maybe they get a late first from the Patriots. But at the end of the day, the Vikings have no leverage here. Stefon Diggs has been a headache, much like Odell Beckham was, much like Antonio Brown was. Now, the Giants, of course, got a mid-first round pick and a player who was drafted in the back end of the first round, 2 years prior with Jabril Peppers. They also got a 3rd round pick, but Odell Beckham was on another level. Odell Beckham, one, from a football standpoint, was arguably the best receiver in the league, if not top 3 or 4. And obviously, he's going to generate a ton of money and endorsements for your football team. So that, they're on another level. Diggs has been a headache. I don't know if they're going to get a first-round pick for him. I remember when the Giants played the Vikings earlier this year, I think it was like week 6, Diggs was already, causing controversy there in Minnesota, being a diva and, trying to force his way up the team. Reports came out he didn't like playing with Kirk Cousins, things of that nature. And now, it's only continued. And he actually had, and one thing I will say, he did talk to, obviously, Yannick Ngakoue on Instagram and Twitter and all that, and he was saying MYG. Remember that? So that was Diggs, which is interesting. Obviously, New York Giants fans might be getting excited about that, as he's, at least hinting that he feels like the New York Giants are a desirable place to play. But will Gettleman bring him in? I don't think so. Dave Gettleman got rid of Odell Beckham because he wanted to clean up the locker room culture, at least in my opinion, and a lot of these players. And Stefon Diggs has demonstrated in Minnesota that he has been bad for the locker room culture. You have a young quarterback with Daniel Jones who you don't want to bring in my opinion, players that are going to do things like that. Now, will Diggs behave if he's in a situation that he likes? Possibly. I mean, to my knowledge, he's never been a headache outside of this year. I could be wrong. I don't follow the Minnesota Vikings on a daily basis. But, when you watch ESPN and things like that, he's never been a guy that has really caused a lot of controversy outside of this year. But if I'm Dave Gettleman, I'm not looking to bring in players that have done things like Stefon Diggs has done. I don't want players who are trying to force their ways off a team. I'm trying to build a good culture. That's been what he has preached the last year or two, getting rid of some of the players that he has felt like are not good for the locker room culture. Diggs is certainly incredibly talented and would certainly help the receiving corps, but at what cost? we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But let's jump into some of his statistics. Let's jump into the contract of Stefon Diggs. First thing I want to pull up for you guys are his statistics. Now, like I said earlier, he's still young. This guy's only going to be 27 next year. He was a former third-round pick by the Minnesota Vikings. I think he was third round. Might have been fourth. I think he was third, though. And he's been fairly consistent throughout his career. He's had his two best years the last 2 years, ironically enough, in terms of statistics at least, with Kirk Cousins, the quarterback he supposedly does not like playing with. But the last 2 years, he had over 1,000 yards in 2018. He had over 1,100 yards last year with 6 touchdowns. For the most, he's never played a full season if you look at those numbers, but he's been relatively healthy throughout the course of his career. And like I said, he's versatile. That is the one thing you could certainly say about him. A guy that you could line up on both the inside and the out. And look at his yards per reception this year. They skyrocketed. His receptions were way down, which is maybe what he's complaining about. He had 102 catches in 2018. This year he only had 63, but actually had more yards. He had about 18 yards per reception as opposed to 10 the following year. So I'm assuming the Vikings lined him up more on the outside, in terms of big play opportunities. But very versatile, something that Joe Judge has definitely expressed, and he would fit the mindset of this offense. So that's something to think about. Next thing we'll pull up is his contract, and to me, this is probably the most attractive feature if I'm looking to bring in Stefon Diggs, is his contract, because by today's standards, today's market, you may say that that's really high. It's actually not. Top wide receivers now, like Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's probably slightly better than Diggs. He is, but Cooper's going to get $20 or $21 million. Diggs, you're getting at a pretty discounted rate, being that he signed this extension, I guess last year or the year before that, and it's actually pretty cost-effective for a guy who's probably a top 15 wide receiver in the league. His cap hit for next year is 14.5, 15, 15, and then 12. So that averages out probably to be about $14 million a year. You think about that, I think Tate got about 10. Diggs is only 26, going on 27, coming off his career year. You'd have him under contract till the age of 29 if you were to acquire him. So I think that, when I read that Vikings fans think that he warrants a first-round pick, I think this is why. I think this is actually a big attraction to teams if they could look past the fact that he's been a distraction in Minnesota and things of that nature. I think New England makes a lot more sense. They've shown that they're willing to bring in players like this, Antonio Brown most recently. I really don't think Dave Gettleman's going to do this. I don't think Dave Gettleman would bring in a player like this. But I could be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong. Bringing in Diggs would certainly fill a need, and especially if you could move Tate or Shepard, because then you're almost bringing in no salary. You still basically have the same amount of cap space as you had. So if you're able to do that, and I would try to do that if I was bringing in a receiver like Diggs, because at that point, what are you going to have? Sterling Shepard or Slayton as your number 4 or Tate as your number 4? It doesn't make much sense. So obviously, I would have to give up picks. But one of the things I would want in that trade was to move one of those wide receivers, and Tate could be an attractive option for them. He's been a solid wide receiver, throughout his career, and you could cut him next year if he doesn't work out. The same could be said for Sterling Shepard, but obviously picks would have to be involved. And then finally, wanted to go over this. This is explaining the reasoning as to why the Vikings would want to move Stefon Diggs, even outside of the fact that he's been a headache. With the Vikings' expected salary cap situation expected to not be great this offseason, to say the very least, they probably will be looking to add as many draft picks as they can during the next few months. One way in which Minnesota can acquire more draft selections this year, and valuable ones, would be to trade Diggs. Given his age, production, and his affordable salary for a player of his talents, the Vikings can probably get a pretty lucrative return in exchange for the receiver. If Minnesota didn't land a first-round pick for a deal involving Diggs, it would be incredibly shocking. That's where we disagree. I'm not saying that they definitely won't get a first-round pick, but what I am saying is I wouldn't be shocked if they don't. This guy has now shown a pattern for being a headache, and as he's very talented, I don't think he's a top 5, 6, 7, 8, even top 10 wide receiver. I don't know if I'd be willing to part with a first-round pick if I had a late first-round pick like New England. They might be willing to do it because, they're trying to keep Tom Brady there. They're trying to keep him happy, along with a few other teams. Maybe the Saints look to do it as well. I didn't see, a bunch of other teams that may be, interested in acquiring him, in terms of rumors. I was just focused mainly on the Giants, but the Patriots popped up. And the Giants, of course, have the cap space to bring in a guy like that, even if they didn't offset one of the contracts like Golden Tate or Sterling Shepard. I don't know, guys. I personally don't think they'll bring him in. I personally wouldn't bring him in unless I could get him for like a third-round pick, and which we don't even have. Early second-round pick, maybe I contemplate it, but I just don't see it. He doesn't fit what the New York Giants are trying to do. And whether or not you agree with that or not, the Giants have clearly started to build towards a certain direction of keeping players like this out of their locker room, guys who have been headaches. And I just think it doesn't make sense to me. To me, it would be hypocritical to have traded Odell Beckham and then to bring in a guy like Stefon Diggs, even though he hasn't been near, the off-field distraction. He has certainly been a headache for Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. So that's my thoughts on it. I think they want guys that are team guys that are trying to build through the locker room with the culture, and maybe Diggs would be that guy, but it's certainly a risk that he wouldn't if he wasn't happy here after a year. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out, but Diggs supposedly is definitely available, and maybe the New York Giants could be interested. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.